the Digital Divide Town Hall. We are sponsored by Columbia University School of Social Work, the West Harlem Development Corporation, which is helping to get tablets to those in West Harlem who need them, and certainly by Community Board number 11, by BetaNYC, and by Silicon Harlem. And this is a really wonderful time to be discussing all of the issues that determine what digital divide is, because as some of you know, I've spent a lot of time in the city council and as borough president looking at data and digital divide, but I don't think anything prepared us, as I'm sure you'll hear, for the need for technology given this horrible coronavirus situation. And that's what we're going to talk about. Apropos, I hope there's no silver lining when so many people have died, friends, family, and so on. But if there is a tiny, tiny bit, it is those of us on this panel, and all of you feel the same way. We've been talking about it for years, the need to make sure that technology is available to everybody. And some of us have been saying this for a very long time. Our first guest is really, really special. Dr. Desmond Patton. He's an associate professor of social work at the Columbia School of Social Work. And we do love that school because it's in East Harlem. And I'm sure the chair of the community board will tell you that. He's the founding director of Safe Lab. He's a member of the Data Science Institute and a faculty affiliate of the Social Intervention Group. And he has a courtesy appointment in the Department of Sociology. His research is qualitative, it's data related, and he studies the relationship as part of his research between youth and gang violence and social media. How and why violence, grief, identity are expressed on social media, and the real world impact these expressions have on the well-being for low-income youth of color. He studies the ways in which gang-involved youth conceptualize threats on social media and the extent to which social media shapes and facilitates youth and gang violence. He has been cited and featured in his research in the New York Times, Chicago Tribune, US Today, NPR, and many, many, many other publications. Before coming to Columbia, he was an assistant professor at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. He holds a BA in anthropology and political science from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and an MSW from the University of Michigan School of Social Work, and a PhD in social service administration from the University of Chicago. Dr. Patton, thank you very much. We're all honored that you're on our panel, and we look forward to hearing from you about this very major issue and your perspective, digital divide. Thank you. Dr. Patton.
Thank you so much. It is so wonderful to be with you all this evening. Again, my name is Desmond Patton. I'm an associate professor of social work, sociology, and data science at the Columbia School of Social Work. I spend a lot of time with young people in New York City, really trying to understand how they make sense of violence and loss and grief on social media, leveraging artificial intelligence to automatically identify these issues online. But I'm particularly concerned about how their life is impacted by the virus and their access to technology or the lack thereof. And in particular, one of the things that I've been really chewing on is reconceptualizing how we think about the digital divide. And I'm going to put an idea out there that I hope we can think about. What if we reimagine the digital divide as a public health issue? This is a concept and idea that my colleague Fallon Wilson has been putting forth, and really thinking about access to technology, leveraging technology as a critical lifeline to services and needs. And when that lifeline is disrupted, how might it impact young people, in particular young people who are ethnic and racial minorities, but are also the same students whose parents are essential workers, who may have lost their jobs, who may be underemployed or unemployed because of the virus, who may lack access to healthcare and other needs as well. So I'm really excited about this conversation and looking forward to the dialogue.
Thank you very much. Our next panel is my friend Nilsa Orama. She is chair of Community Board 11. She has chaired the 2015 nominating committee. She's a former vice chair of the Housing Bylaws and Youth and Education Committee, and she's been on the Parks Committee, and she also had a lot to do with the East Harlem Rezoning Task Force. I was on that task force. That was a lot of work. She's a lifelong resident of East Harlem. She has served as a parent volunteer in many schools in the district, as well as in the Ice Hockey in Harlem program. She has been participating in CERT, which is the Community Emergency Response Training, an organization that I feel very strongly about. It's under the Office of Emergency Management, which is quite busy these days. She's the director in terms of her job, a real job, as opposed to just the community board, which is another full-time job. She's director of the East Harlem Multi-Service Center. It's an HRA multi-service center, and it provides office space for 12 not-for-profits in East Harlem. She's also the president of the East Harlem El Barrio Land Trust, where she has been the board secretary for quite some time. And she has worked as a job developer for the East Harlem Council for Community Improvement, which is an adult training program. And she has held the position of director of youth services, and she has spent a great deal of time focused on youth development. She holds a Master of Business Administration, and she's a licensed notary public. I just know her as one terrific community board chair. Nilsa, go ahead.
Thank you, Gail. Right back at you. So as she said, as our great Manhattan Borough President stated, my name is Nilsa Orama, and I'm the chair of Manhattan Community Board 11. I've been living in East Harlem for a total number of years. And I want to thank Gail, I want to thank Columbia University, all the sponsors who have collaborated on this event. I am honored to be on a panel with Desmond and Clayton and Noel. I am the lay person of the group. I can't speak to the specialties that everyone will speak to in terms of technology, but I can bring a regular personal perspective to this conversation because I know what it's like not to have computer skills and have to sign up in a not-for-profit to learn computer skills and to then try to compete with those out there who have more marketable skills than I did and learn how to sell myself, because it's not easy when you come from a certain community where you're Black and brown and you may not have the polish that people are looking for to get your foot in the door. And so that's what drove me to work with the Summer Youth Employment Program for close to 14 years, so that I can help shape through my experiences what others would be going through, because our communities are only going to grow and thrive through the youth and through the people within our communities. We know that our immigrant communities don't get all the support. A lot of our kids, we have that digital divide that I'm sure we're going to talk about, which it's not only technology, it's money, it's a whole bunch of different things that separate our communities and do not allow our youth or our community members to think that they can compete. So I am very happy to be here. The COVID-19 has decimated our community, but I think it gives us an opportunity to learn and to plan so that the next time we will be in a better place. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So Noel Hidalgo is Executive Director of BetaNYC. He works at the crossroads of technology and government and community impact. He believes in participatory communities and uses technology to improve people's lives. That is true. Since 2009, he has organized BetaNYC to be a driving force to improve our city's use of technology and share its data. I think you know that I passed the open data bill, and I so appreciate BetaNYC taking this bill and going miles than I ever could have imagined in terms of sharing it with communities. BetaNYC has advocated for a suite of government transparency laws, including the city's transformative open data law and city record online law. BetaNYC runs New York City's Civic Innovation Lab Fellows Program with the Office of the Manhattan Borough President, and it curates the New York City School of Data Community Conference. It's a wonderful conference every year, hugely attended. He was an Eagle Scout. I did not write that part. He was a Technology and Democracy Fellow at Harvard Kennedy School, Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation, He served as an inaugural member of Code for America's National Advisory Council and is a former fellow, currently an affiliate of Data and Society Research Institution. And he's a very special guy. Noel, go ahead.
Thanks, Gail. It's a pleasure to be here. So one of the things that we focus on within the digital divide is the access to information part. We're so fortunate to be able to work with Gail on a regular basis, who is the fairy godmother of civic technology and open data in New York, because we can address problems that are hard to see. We like to think back to the days of when the whole notion of epidemiology just was created. And so here we had a doctor, his name was John Snow in London, that wanted to track down cholera cases. The doctor essentially started going through Soho and started looking and knocking on doors and kept on finding that the residents had left the neighborhood. So he had to work with a local expert, the Reverend Henry Whitehead, to identify where people had lived beforehand, before the cholera outbreak, and essentially then make a map and identify where was the cluster of information, to then point out that cholera was actually a disease that came about from a broken water pump that was connected to a broken cistern. And so, that was well over 100 years ago. And today we are still fighting that same battle, the same battle of trying to figure out where is the information located, how do we get access to it, and then who are the people that know most about that information, and how can we translate that to the general public. So BetaNYC as an organization was started off as a meetup. We then formalized as a nonprofit after Hurricane Sandy, when we realized that there was a huge opportunity to network the city's technology community. As part of that effort, we ended up writing this thing called the Digital Roadmap, the People's Roadmap to a Digital New York City, where we articulated a number of different policy proposals that end up driving our existence for the last 6 years. Primarily, we focus on getting people access to information. We work with Gail's office and CUNY to provide a framework where kids can understand, CUNY kids, they're not really kids, they're young adults, they're young professionals who are trying to understand how to use data and information to solve problems. Those CUNY undergraduate students then work with community board members to help build a common understanding, a common narrative around looking at 311 issues, looking at where are noise complaints that are coming from before or after hours, so that way the Department of Buildings can then send out inspectors to really take a look at what are the problems. One of the other things that we work with Gail's office is taking a look at vulnerable religious facilities. So how do we go about finding and collecting the data to help understand and address community problems? When it comes to the digital divide, what we've looked at is really focusing on getting access to information, building lightweight tools to give you access to that information, building training so that way you then know how to use the tools and you know the language around those things, and then advocating back into government so that way government has the capacity and the resources internally to essentially build the things that will ultimately help bridge the digital divide.
Thank you very much. Our next wonderful panelist is Clayton Banks. Clayton Banks is a CEO and co-founder of Silicon Harlem. And Silicon Harlem, another organization for which I have great respect, and its goal is to combine technology and innovation with affordable connectivity that can enable a sustainable economic engine in communities that are emerging around the United States, although I'm focused on Harlem. I just do Manhattan, sorry, Clayton. Under his leadership, Silicon Harlem has attracted over $50 million into Upper Manhattan for advanced infrastructure research and test bedding. He has positioned Upper Manhattan as a tech and innovation hub, that is for sure. And it's one of the fastest growing areas for tech startups, entrepreneurs, and companies. He's been able to galvanize the public sector, the private sector, universities, and the community to embrace tech as a sustainable economic engine for Upper Manhattan. And before Silicon Harlem was there, that wasn't true. He has established critical programs that are based on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, in the schools and in nonprofits to prepare residents for the jobs of the 21st century. Prior to Silicon Harlem, Banks was a pioneer in the cable and communications industry. He set the vision for Ember Media, a development group that builds digital solutions and interactive applications for brands and nonprofit organizations. Known as a pragmatic visionary, he has developed and deployed leading edge technology and applications for network, cloud, gaming, social media, virtual reality, tablets, and so on. He worked with former President Bill Clinton to publish a first of its kind interactive college guide called The Key, and it's for underserved communities, and it features historically Black colleges and universities and Hispanic serving institutions. He served as Vice President of Affiliate Relations for Comedy Central. That I didn't know about Clayton Banks. He has been recognized with many awards and honors. I'm honored that he is our representative for Manhattan on something called COPIC, and he can tell us what that is in the Public Advocate's Office. But he's been honored by many, many others. So without further ado, thank you very much, Clayton, and please join us about the digital divide.
Thank you, Gail. It's quite an honor, actually, to, one, be in a town hall with you, and two, all the phenomenal panelists.
Yes.
One of the things I would sort of make clear, it's not just a digital divide. We know that's the subject today, but there's just really divides. If we only lean on the digital part of it, we may miss the entire idea of closing gaps. There's a wealth gap in this country. There's a health gap in this country. There's certainly education as a gap, homework gaps. There's a lot of gaps, not all due to digital. A lot of it is just a systemic, historic legacy that this country just has not addressed. The digital and the technology that has grown over the years certainly illuminates the idea of divides. And we've seen it pretty much all our lives. TV had a divide, cable had a divide, the internet had a divide, and now here, broadband connectivity has a divide. Those are very much clear, but here's what's the even scarier news. While we'll be talking about today, I'm thinking a lot about tomorrow. Yeah. And tomorrow, if there's one thing I'm certain of, if you look at your past, is that there's gonna be another divide. And if we don't start to address that now, it's going to be our own fault. And when you say, Clayton, what's the next divide? Well, it's clear to me, having traveled all over the world, that countries and states and cities and villages and communities are preparing for a tech-enabled world. Everything becomes tech-enabled, autonomous, virtual. This will create the next digital divide, if you will. And I want to prepare our communities here in New York City, and particularly in Upper Manhattan, to be prepared, because most divides are defined by, you know about it, to Noel's point about information, or you can or cannot afford it. That's really been the real definition of these divides, particularly in the technology sector. So what I'm trying to focus on, Bruce and I both, are figuring out how to ensure that we bring the information in, we bring in research, we leapfrog when it comes to technology, and make sure that a community is prepared for that next wave of technology, and certainly not be caught in a divide. And again, with all of that, we still got to look at why are there food deserts in low-income areas that create sort of the health issues that we're talking about? Why are there not more, opportunities for tech companies and all that kind of stuff that starts to, spread out through these communities? There's a lot of other symptoms that are creating sort of the divides that we're talking about tonight. And I'll finally say, yes, if you looked at our history, Silicon Harlem, we've been talking about connectivity since 2013. Gail was with us from the very beginning. She's been preaching it forever too. And so for us, this is not new. It's not the pandemic that's going to make us all get connected. We should have been doing this a long time ago. And to my fellow panelists, I would take it one step further. this is something that we have to work towards in terms of making connectivity almost a utility. It's like water in your home. It's a civil right more than a health right. So I hope we can get into some of those issues, but let's prepare ourselves for the future as much as we have to do what we have to do right now.
Well, thank you very much. I think we could all have a discussion whether it's 18% or 29% do not have broadband internet access. And, you know, the numbers are staggeringly high. So I want to start with you, Dr. Patton, because we have actually all 120 and growing people who are participating in tonight's panel, listening, and certainly, hopefully they'll ask more questions, but a lot of them are already about young people. And so I know that's your unbelievably fabulous focus and your academic research. So my question is, you know, something that however you want to approach it, but certainly we want to understand how technology, I want to make this positive. How can technology address some of the issues that we've all been arguing for such a long time? Because we do have every one of those divides and more that were mentioned by Clayton. So is there something that we're looking toward that could help us in this recovery? Because I do a lot of Zooms and you do also, and I'm now focused, as others are, what's next, as opposed to God knows we should be healthy and God knows the healthcare workers are the folks we honor. But right now we got to think about the future. And if we're not careful, we're going to end up in the same health, same food, same digital that we've been in the past. So I'm just wondering if, you know, a lot of people are asking about this on the chat and certainly in advance. So it's all yours, Dr. Patton.
Yeah, first, I think we really need to think through what are some strategies that we can enact right now. Number one, I really think that we need to prioritize the care of students. And it goes back to this idea that Clayton and others have been underscoring, that there have been issues that have been long-standing within our education system, within our society, that are just being amplified through this virus. But we need to prioritize the care of students, particularly as they move to remote learning. Number two is that we really have to create opportunities for project-based learning and enrichment, that it's not about moving the school into the home, because we know that that's not really a reality for a lot of the families and communities that we're talking about. Being able to say, let's do Algebra 1 in home today is not going to be a reality for a lot of our students. So how can we really think about creating innovative experiences where young people can learn from in the home? What are some cultural enrichments? What are some things and experiences we can go back to that we have long forgotten that can still be an enriching experience for our students, but don't have to be a one-to-one correspondence with the exact thing that they're doing in the school? And then we just need to have some realistic expectations about what students can do during this time. And so I think, you know, some of the things we really have to think through are, how do we partner with students? How do we center their voices in this experience? And we partner with their teachers and their parents and their administrators. How do we continue to identify and support disadvantaged students? Here, I think there's an opportunity to really work with our social work partners that are in the school and within the community as well. We have an array of social work institutions, in particular Columbia School of Social Work, where we can have digital social workers that are partnering with teachers in this moment to identify those really critical and cross-cutting needs for students that might be interfering with their ability to learn during the day as well. We also need to consider emphasizing asynchronous learning in this space as well. And then really trying to think through, how do we strategically reduce some of the learning goals during the moment as well? How do we help students form student groups so they can teach each other during this time? And how do we prioritize time for individual students and really focus on plans for remediation that will need to happen as a result of this as well?
Okay. Nilsa, obviously you're on the ground in East Harlem, not too far from the School of Social Work. And I'm just wondering, you know, you're hardly a layperson like you say you are, but I'll let you get away with that for a little while. But the question is, you know, without being, you know, we can't solve all the problems, but I do think generally young people could find a way to make what was just suggested by Dr. Patton something that's realistic? How can we make sure that policy exists if it should? What do you think?
I think that in order to make policy, we need to have some concrete examples of how we can show that things are working, right? Because we all have different ideas, but then when we try to show them or we try to talk about them to have them adopted so that people can think about as policy, if we don't have concrete examples, almost like a pilot, so as you will, it's very hard to get people to buy in on certain things. I'll give you a perfect example. The state had a program, I'm not sure if they still do, it was called the PAVE program. And what that program did was it was a program that allowed students to come in and after school, high school students, they could do work-related activities. They can do a research on a career, like let's say if it was a technical project, it could be something on the digital divide or anything like that. And it would give them college credit, it would give them high school credit and towards college readiness preparation. Those are things that we need to look at. We need to look at how do we empower ourselves to work with partners such as Desmond and Clayton so that we can have a think group, a think tank, as you will, so that the ideas that Desmond has mentioned and that Clayton, I'm sure, will expound upon, that we can then write, adopt, see how we can get a group of young people together to see how that would work. I think once we show that we have things that can actually lead to success, it'll be a lot easier to have buy-in both from government, from the city council, from not-for-profit partners. The government, DYCD is always funding not-for-profits to do the same kind of program all over again. Summer youth, usually with the same providers. We can use those kind of funding opportunities to target a specific not-for-profit with an idea of a program that fulfills what DYCD is looking, but goes even beyond that, that can prove what youth can do and how they can adapt to tech work, how they can adapt to using and to overcoming digital divides. Because if we don't have anything on the ground, we can just have ideas and we can say, we think that, East Harlem should have 1,000 computers. Okay, now we have 1,000 computers. What are or laptops or tablets? How are they going to be used? Well, they're going to be used this way. And what is the outcomes? For instance, Summer Youth has been canceled. One of the ideas could be that if we're having kids work at home, that they may decide to be working with the census where they can do calls. They might be able to do training so that they can get a Microsoft certification depending on their age. Younger youth can be using the internet to do research and to do other things that will help expand and enhance what the community is looking for.
Okay. Noel, I know you've been thinking about these issues also in terms of maybe young people. To me, could be high school, could be college. So how do you think it's a broader issue, just generally trying to figure out on this divide issue? And it's not just one kind of divide, but if we can attack one divide, maybe something else will go away. I don't know, but go ahead with what thoughts you might have about this.
Yeah, well, I think the statement about inequality is spot on. And, so many of us are fortunate enough to have the liberty and the opportunity to work on civic issues. I would love to know at one time period, any of us first talked to an elected official. And something that we work with the Department of Education is empowering middle school and high school students to actually have those first meetings with their elected official. We work with the Department of Education CS for All program to essentially grow an opportunity for students to use open data and to use computer science skills as part of an academic competition, so that way they can then go take that information that they're seeing of civic issues in their community and go speak directly to city council members. If you go to our website, beta.nyc, and search for Hack League, you'll see the very first hackathon inside of City Hall, where we actually disturbed Corey Johnson while he was working, because we got about 150 students to stomp their feet inside of the City Hall chambers to let everybody know inside of City Hall, the middle school and high school students were there to use their computer science principles to articulate their voice and to address issues like the Young Women's Leadership School of Astoria. They built an app that allows students in their neighborhood to essentially go collect Bitcoin, go collect trash. They would go around their neighborhood, they would earn Bitcoin by collecting trash, and then they could then donate that money to community groups that were part of the app. Or, like New York City is so diverse, the problems are really diverse. And so the number 2 team in the middle school was Oh Deer, which is to deal with the deer population on Staten Island. And so it was an interactive app that could teach people essentially how to deer-proof their trash and their sanitation issues, so that way it wouldn't cause the problem that they were seeing trash all around their neighborhoods. And so as we see addressing the digital divide, or as Clayton so eloquently pointed and everyone else did, is just the divide. And that we need to really engineer a systematic government and education that helps bridge this divide. And it's not just information, but it's also just the tools. Like, we need to be thinking differently about what are the tools and making sure that those tools are accessible to everybody.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I know, Clayton, I mean, we all talk about access to the internet, being part of the issue, and tablets being part of the issue. It's bigger than that. I mean, that should be the basis. We're not even there yet. So I'm just wondering, how do we get, because you've been trying, how do we get to the first there with, free internet, which is hard, and then tablets? Some of the parents are writing in, how do we get tablets for all students? Now, certainly DOE up to close to 300,000 trying to give out to young people. And I've been in all those discussions, and they're certainly trying. I don't take that from them, but it's more than getting folks a tablet and more than getting folks free internet. So I'm just, how do you think we go beyond, even though we're not even there yet? That's the trouble. But I don't know how you can approach, it's hard to think of how to get rid of all these divides.
I'm not sure if in your comments you're going to talk about this particular subject, but I do want to mention one thing on building on the student focus that we have right here. One of the issues that I find is that there's still a lot of teachers in the public school system that are also uncomfortable with remote teaching, for example, or not as savvy with technology as they ought to be. The kids have no problem. They're growing up in a digital world, so their adoption is very quick. The learning curve is very short. That's easy. But for some of the teachers in the public school system, I think need attention. I remember, Gail, you and I talked about, what we ended up doing was getting part of the whole STEM Institute. And we were teaching teachers around STEM and how to create curriculum and how to teach. And just about every program we've been involved in, whether it's working with the DOE or others, we've always asked to have a teacher in the classroom with us. And recently, we actually have been teaching in the projects. We actually go to the projects. Who does that, right? So we went to the projects to teach on various things, including coding and stuff like that. So the point I'm making, though, is that the entire solution has to include how we build out the teaching level, as well as administrators. There's still a lot of people, and you've been fighting this more than anyone, Gail, along with everyone else on this call, to get broadband, better broadband in schools. It's getting there, to your point. But boy, is everyone getting the digital literacy. So we always talk about it as a three-legged stool. You need a device, you need the connection, the internet, and you need digital literacy. And that's across the board. Most of the people on this call probably would be challenged to tell us what their speed is up and down right now. We don't all, but we all pay for it. So to your question of how do we make sure everyone has it? Well, I think a city like New York should make a commitment that not only every student will have a device every year that they're in schools, and I'm talking particularly public school, every single kid. And I think the way you do it is both public and private. I'm finding that there are a lot of the private sector. By the way, in the throes of this pandemic, there's one industry that has not suffered that much, and that's the tech companies, including Zoom, right? So the tech industry has been booming as a result of this pandemic because everyone's paying attention. So the private sector has a stake in making sure all these kids have the equipment and the access and the exposure. And I also think from a sustainable level, we've got to bring the economy to these low-income areas. When California did their study about broadband penetration, they said, wow, low-income areas have the highest level of not being connected. And my answer was, duh. So the point is, this is not a simply I want or I don't want it. It's become a financial issue. It's hard to have all of that in your home if you don't have the money for it. So we've got to lower that cost. The private sector has a stake in it. We have to get our city writing policy around. It has to be in the hands of every kid of every year in their schooling. And that at the end of the day, we've got to lower the cost, if not make it free, for broadband across this beautiful city.
Yeah. So, Dr. Patton, I'm a little jaded because, as Clayton knows, I've been talking about this for a long time. So it gets me a little frustrated, to be honest with you. I feel like it's deja vu. We're getting baby steps. And so I don't know, some of the questioners are saying, why can't the companies like Verizon and others, Spectrum and the big guys participate, public-private partnership? That too has some challenges because you always, having testified at the FCC many times and dealt with some of the issues they want when they want to dig up the streets and they want, certain things, but they don't want to sort of help the city along, even though they're getting great access in terms of their cable or their wireless. So my question is there a public-private partnership? We all want free broadband. I know that John Paul Farmer, who is the CTO, Chief Technology Officer now for the city and has great credentials. He has the Internet Master Plan, 88 pages. I've read most of it, but it's relying on open access fiber networks, ISPs. Again, I'm jaded because I did talk about this 15 years ago, and San Francisco didn't do it, and Philadelphia didn't do it, and so then I'm like, how are we going to do it? And the kiosks don't do it. That's not going to work. So I'm jaded, and I think I need to listen to you to see how, given your research, is that what we're aiming for? What are we aiming for the young people? And it's not just young people, it's families, it's small businesses. When I had a meeting recently, virtually, with all the business improvement districts managers, these are all across Manhattan, Upper Manhattan in particular, Washington Heights was the only area where the small businesses had to be visited by the manager. Everywhere else you get on and you send out technology, email, text, or something. Here, the manager of the bid had to find the person's phone number at home. And that's not easy when the bodega is closed. Yeah. That's how it had to communicate. So it's when I talk about this issue of technology and families and students, I'm really talking about a broader community. So I'm wondering if you could add to this, because to be honest with you, I think we're kind of stumped on making it a reality.
I mean, I don't know if I am, if I have a really different perspective than you do on this topic, but I think that it should be expanded to public, private, and everybody. Because it's very clear to me that we can't rely solely on private relationships to make this happen. For example, one of the best opportunities that I've been able to engage in is that at Columbia Social Work, we created a virtual fellowship for formerly incarcerated citizens to get involved in technology. And so we partner with the co-cooperative to teach our fellows coding and user research. And so when we needed to get laptops, we went to co-cooperative that went to their private relationships to be able to identify those laptops that we needed. But then, as you have been hinting at and underscoring, is that that's not just the issue, right? And so we need the technology tools. We need the phones and the laptops. We need all those things. but there's also the environmental conditions in the home and the number of tools that are available that's also important. So what we know from the research is that, you know, young people do better when there are multiple platforms in the home. So if I only have my smartphone, whereas a young person from the Upper East Side has a smartphone, a VR headset, and a laptop, well, they're going to perform much better than the person who just has the smartphone at home. So we have to think about the multiplicity of tools that are available, but also, do I have the environmental conditions that make it conducive for me to learn in this environment as well? And that's where we really have to think about those community partnerships, those local leaders in the community that can work with families. This has to be, everybody has to be on board. This can't be technologists or private folks. We need the community leaders. We need the board leaders. We need everyone to help create environments and atmospheres that make it conducive for learning, period.
So when you worked with this program that you just described for the virtual and social workers and incarcerated, has it had any outcome yet, or is it still like a pilot and being worked on?
Yeah, so this was our last week, and it's been amazing to be able to run a virtual program during this pandemic. We've had a lot of challenges, but working with the cooperative, working with Get Out, Stay Out in East Harlem has been an amazing experience. So having the right people at the table has been extremely important. But I would say one of the mishaps that we didn't consider in the beginning was that, you know, when we switched to virtual, folks didn't have access to Wi-Fi. And so they were so excited to learn coding. They were so ready to go. And so we had to buy hotspots, but even buying the hotspots didn't mean that they were going to show up the way that we wanted them to show up because of everything else that's going on. They're living their life, they're struggling, they're needing to get paychecks. And so we having to cover all those other contextual and community level factors. All of that has to be in conversation with the amount of tools, the type of tools, access to Wi-Fi as well. We can't separate those pieces out.
No, so a lot of people are asking about NYCHA, no surprise, and how in East Harlem, as an example, how does NYCHA fit into this issue? It has the environmental issues that were just described. It has all of the divide issues that were just described. Ooh, and I don't know how, if at all, looking at the digital divide can be bridged in some way, in some kind of a pilot, as you suggested. But maybe you could help us with what is needed. And again, a pilot might make sense, but NYCHA is a big challenge in terms of technology.
So I grew up in NYCHA. I'm a product of NYCHA, Lehman Village, and Johnson houses. And so we had problems then. We have multiple more problems now. Our NYCHA population and our apartments in NYCHA, the housing stock has been woefully neglected. You all know by reading the newspapers when there hasn't been water, there had no heat, no hot water, ceilings falling down. And so already, nobody is thinking about divides at that moment. They're thinking of survival, right? Yep. How do I make sure that my asthma doesn't get more exacerbated because of the mold that's in the bathroom? Or how do I make sure that my son doesn't get mugged as he goes down the stairs because the doors are kept open and people just come in, right? So I can go on about NYCHA. NYCHA, as horrible as it sounds, has a wealth of people who want to do better and want their kids to do better and want themselves to do better. And so when people talk about NYCHA, they have a view of a certain population. And I'm here to tell you that that is not so. We have hardworking parents in NYCHA who work, who pay high rents just in order to hold a roof over their head. So what does NYCHA need? NYCHA needs schools that are responsive to NYCHA residents. And what I mean by that, there are a lot of young people who have not been tested for learning disabilities. And they get into school and they try to keep up and they can't keep up and they're labeled as unable to learn, or depending on how graphic you want to be, some people call them stupid. They don't take into account that a child may have a language barrier because he comes from Spanish parents who only speak Spanish and he's learning English. So what are the things we need to do? We need to try to assess, get more social workers in the schools, or students that can come in from social work programs to actually work with the teachers to try to do honest day-to-day assessments. It's not always the technical assessment that can lead you down a certain road. Sometimes it's just observation. How do we open up technology and digital learning to parents who only speak Spanish? We need to start doing things that are teaching that is based on the home language so that the young person can learn not only in their language, but the parents are also empowered to learn. We need those laptops in NYCHA. We need to assess that what are the tools that are needed so that kids learn. We also need to know about the stressors in their life. It's not just one thing, but I think I also directed another program called the Escalera program, and it was through the National Council of La Raza at that time. Now it's called Unidos US, the organization. And what they did was they sponsored 15 young people in the community. They started with 15. And these young people could be immigrants. More than likely, their parents could have been undocumented. And what these students did was they tried to learn. It was an after-school program. They did a project. They got laptops. They got, I think, cameras, digital cameras, so that they can learn how to do digital photography and learn how to use a digital camera. They got laptops. They also got a stipend. Well, I challenge something like that to be thought of maybe on a smaller scale with multiple partners, with the expertise of someone like Desmond, with the expertise of someone like Clayton, and with funding, targeted funding in potentially one of our quote unquote worst developments, to try to weed out young people that may have background in they may have some kind of legal challenge. So we shouldn't look at the cream of the crop. We should look across the board to try to stagger who we can assist. And I think if we can do something like that, so that we empower NYCHA residents and NYCHA students so that they feel they are so much more than people think they are. And with that comes other training, teaching our kids that they can be in the boardroom and they can speak up and that they represent, because the truth is, if our kids don't start taking the lead, other people that don't know their challenges will be the leaders that will step up. And this will continue to perpetuate. It will not get better.
Well, that's a wonderful segue, because lots of questions are coming in. Should everybody have a laptop? Yes. Should everybody have a computer? Yes. And, but you get back to this environment issue. It's a package of challenges. So I want to know, Noel, the issue of data, which of course, you know a lot more about than I do, although I feel very strongly and from a public policy perspective. So there's a lot of discussion given this COVID about data. How many people in the hospital today? How many people, may they rest in peace, died today? How many people have the disease? How many people are asymptomatic? How many healthcare workers? How many grocery workers? The list is endless. How many people are not distancing, social distance? How many people are at home? How many seniors don't have food? That's what I've been working on. How many, and the list goes on. Data, data, data. And you hear elected officials state, I'm listening or not, depending, to the scientists, right? And the scientists equal data. So, it's a good thing if we're using the data and using it correctly. And there are next step testing. How many tests? This kind of test, that kind of test. Where are the tests? And now, of course, do we need detectives to go find those of us who have had the disease and recovered? And where are we? And maybe we still have it, or we got it. And whose friends have we, you got the picture. Massachusetts has already hired folks, the governor and the mayor. I'm not quite sure who's hiring what, but they're both stating they're hiring folks to figure this out. So whether it's Bloomberg paying for it, the city's paying for it, I don't know. But there are certainly discussions along those lines, and there are places where you can apply for these jobs. So my question to you as a data person, picking up on what Nilsa has stated and Dr. Patton, where these challenges are so huge. Is there a data solution? In other words, we have the device, pretend. We have, hopefully, some kind of free Wi-Fi, broadband access. That's what I could go on and on about, but I'm not going to right now, lack of. And then how does the data play a role? I know that California is also looking at some of these data issues and how it can be used to make us healthy, but at the same time, please, can they also solve some of these divide issues? Well, that's my question. It's a big one, but I know you have a lot of experience with the data.
Thank you. I don't know where to begin with all of the great questions. I will say that, broadly speaking, when it comes to data in general, data is a form of language. And we all learn language through a very intensive process, right? Nobody is shot out and you come out into this world and you know how to speak. You acquire the ability to communicate over time, and you're constantly revising those methods of communication time and time again. And we have verbal feedback, we have visual feedback, sometimes that is interpreted body language. So the ability to communicate is fundamentally data that we're gathering. And we develop a literacy around these things. And we grow that level of literacy over time. The same thing goes for essentially translating that into a data literacy. But when you come to a data literacy, something that we've seen is that you have to understand many other layers. Not only is it just about the tactics and the language of the data, but it's also like how you're pulling apart how an agency describes their particular operations. So you now have to know a function, and you have to know a language, and then you have to know the tool, and then you have to have the right set of tools. And so these are all complicated layers and complicated problems that fundamentally need to be baked into our educational system and need to be baked into literacy programs at the earliest level and all the way to the oldest level. They need to be baked into, actually, I will say this in another way, is that the classes and the way to create literacy needs to be organized around how someone learns. And so Nilsa brought up people who learn differently. I learned differently. Throughout my 12 years of growing up, I was a quote unquote special needs child because of my attention deficit issues, as well as my ability to somehow improperly communicate to my instructors. They wanted me to run through a very rigorous formulaic process that my brain just didn't quite understand. And so we need to understand that not everyone learns in the same way, and not everyone has the same level of language and capacity. And we need to invest in ways to bring up people's literacy. We did this with reading and writing in the 20th century, where we brought nearly everyone up to a comprehensive level of being able to read and write. We systematically tackled poverty in these Great Society programs, which put reading and writing at its foundation. We need to do the same thing in the 21st century, but to do so means that we have to invest in our education system, and we have to invest in job training systems. And those are things that, as you can see in the types of economic crises that we've had, not just are having, but that we've had, we systematically underfund And those who are at the top keep on getting wealthier, and those at the bottom keep on struggling to survive. So, we need to create literacy that is accessible to everyone, which fundamentally means we have to create a broad set of literacy.
I know, Clayton, you have worked in a sense in this digital literacy world, because when I think of it and I think of the divide, and it's a broader divide as you keep stating, but you've worked with the seniors, and in Harlem, particularly elsewhere also, that's a big divide for the seniors to understand digital literacy, and of course, young people and the language issues, which Noel has eloquently described. So I'm just wondering, what resources are there for New Yorkers, whether you're in NYCHA or not, or anywhere, to bridge this skill gap? And then the most challenging question, which I wouldn't have 2 months ago asked, is how do we approach this issue in the current world of social distancing? When I am on the phone with different city officials, or more importantly, the private sector people, restaurants, bars, etc., all they think about is, what is the world going to look like with social distancing and everything else that's going on? So how will this world, in social distancing and trying to get the divide, I'll just leave it at that, addressed? I mean, that's a hard question, but maybe you thought about it for the future.
Well, I think about it all the time. I believe that we're going to be moving into what we call a new normal, and that new normal will look like a hybrid between remote and physical. And we will have a whole new way of looking at things like, take your shoes off when you come into my home. So I always thought that was silly, but now I understand it. So there will be a new normal. I want to talk about this question, but I want to quickly just do a nod to data that Noel talked about. One thing I want to demystify around data. Data is, for me, more of a compass than driven, right? People talk about data-driven, data-driven, data-driven. I don't think it drives. I think it's more of a compass. We still have to bring humanity to data. Data said economy works when you have slaves, but somebody had to say, wait a minute, something's wrong with having slaves. So we have to look at data as a compass that might point us a direction, but we still have to add humanity to all of this. And we often talk about advancing humanity. As you look at this pandemic, it's actually challenging each of us individually to figure out, how do we bring equity to all zip codes? So to your point, we always are looking at how to demystify technology. If you remember, Gail, when we were at St. Nicholas Houses and we had that one meeting, and when the questions came up, the first question from one of the NYCHA residents was, hey, Mr. Banks, how come my intercom doesn't work? Now, we weren't there to talk about intercoms at all, but that came up because there was a safety issue. I can't see my mom, or all these type of things. And so that's when it hit me that this still comes down to people.
That's what Nilsa was saying. Yeah.
And I believe, and I said it on January 23rd in a big meetup at our office, that within the next few years, everyone will be connected and will be able to afford it if it's not 100% free. If you look at New York City, Gail, to your point of why it's been so frustrating for you and for me and others, we now have the infrastructure to do this, to make this actually happen. If you look how fast Intersection and Link NYC deployed an entire network, and certainly it's not as comprehensive as it needs to be, but as you see how quickly that happened, this is now the moment when we can do this for the entire city, especially for those areas that are most at risk. And so I believe the connectivity piece will be sort of out of the way, and then it becomes, how do we use that to create the literacy that leads to good jobs or a good college or other trainings and certifications? We, Silicon Harlem, know this works, Nilsa, because we went into East Harlem. We were challenged to build out what we call a resilient wireless network. We worked with all of the businesses in and around the East Harlem area, and we hired kids out of the neighborhood, trained them for several months on how to become basically network deployment engineers. And we built the very first resilient network in East Harlem. Because when Hurricane Sandy hit, it obviously flooded over as the East River flooded over it as East Harlem is sort of a floodplain. So we were able to build that out. So these are not things where we're waiting for somebody to come. These are things that we know how to do. And frankly, we'll be doing more of that throughout the city, almost looking like an ISP, if you will, because broadband, the expense of it is ultimately in the capital up front. After that, it's relatively free. The incumbents can do it right now, but they obviously are on the hook for video. We don't have that anymore. And so the point I'm making is we will solve the connectivity piece. We will work on the device piece, and we will have people digital literacy that leads into a job and a career. And there will be people out of NYCHA and people out of other areas of the city that will become, part of the economic growth that this city has well in front of it. And it will be based a lot in the ability to have that level of literacy around technology. But we need to demystify it. It has to be humanized. And I believe that it's for everybody. So I've seen senior citizens, Gail, let me end with this since you talked about this and you've been at our senior citizen meetups. The senior citizen, the very first year, everybody on this call, we did it in 2016. Our very first year, we did a demystified technology for seniors. And the first question I had was, Mr. Banks, I heard you talk about social media, and I just want to know, why do people want to be my friend? I really got that question, and we all sort of laughed, but we all sort of asked that question at the very beginning. And then last year, I did the same thing. This is 4 or 5 straight years we've been doing it. And a hand went up, and a lady says, hey, I was walking through the store the other day, and I had my smartphone, and all of a sudden, I got this notification on my phone, Mr. Banks, and I was just wondering how, and I almost fell off my chair. The literacy can be done no matter how old you are or how young you are. The critical piece here is giving everybody that access, and we can get that done. And we can hire people right out of the NYCHA housing everywhere.
Well, that's all right. I agree with you. We're going to make sure that happens. We're up to 250 viewers, which is a lot. Congratulations. And I just want to mention, there's another group called Digital Divide Partners, Stuart Reed, and they too have been working in NYCHA. So there are a lot of people attempting. We're slowly getting there. And I think with this kind of discussion, and I have to say, there might be a small silver lining in this god-awful virus in terms of what we have learned. So, Dr. Patton, I have a lot of people are asking, this is kind of a challenging question, but what is the world going to look like, post-COVID? We've kind of been talking about that. Obviously, you should feel free to talk about the community where you've done your research, and we have been discussing it. But they worry, how many people have died because of poverty. And then is there some role, we talked a little bit in terms of health conditions, is there some role, mental health or physical health, can it be changed in terms of who accesses it? So we have less deaths, not just because of COVID, but we all know all about these underlying conditions. So I guess you're working with populations that definitely have all kinds of underlying conditions. And I'm wondering if there is any role for technology in that group, and if it might play a role in terms of our future. It's hard to know.
Well, for me, I think that whatever technology we leverage in this time and in the future first has to center and prioritize and privilege the experiences of the most vulnerable. And when I mean vulnerable, I mean those who are visibly and invisibly vulnerable as well. I think that the technology has to be co-created and co-developed with the community as well. And so, as we've been talking about, there are all of these important, critical social needs that have to be at the forefront of whatever comes out of these experiences. And yet I am so very hopeful because we're having this conversation now. We're going to go back to our respective communities. We're going to figure out ways to partner. I'm hopeful that we're going to begin to really center these conversations, because if this virus hasn't done anything, what it has done is hyper visibly underscore the inequality in our country.
Yes.
And we cannot turn back. And so I hope that we see this as an opportunity to do so much better. What I've learned from young people is that they are so very excited about what technology offers in terms of career opportunities. There was no challenge in being able to start this new fellowship with formerly incarcerated citizens. These are all young people that had just come home. They were so very excited to learn coding. They were so very excited, most importantly, to offer their expertise as a way to develop new technologies and to critique and critically analyze technologies. For example, as we think about contact tracing, let's have partnerships with NYCHA and other community members to think about what are the best ways to do contact tracing. Should we use apps or should we use more analog methods? And we have to be in conversation with those community members before we move forward with the best approaches.
It makes sense to me. Well, do you think that, I mean, Massachusetts is doing something, California is doing something, as I understand it. You may have more information than I do. I've only read about it in the press in terms of some kind of contact tracing. And I talked to a California organization today. They have all the data, not as much as Noel does, because nobody has as much as Noel, but they have done the overlays that are needed. How many people in the hospital, again, making sure HIPAA is abided, not broken in terms of its very necessary privacy issues. How many people on my block, how many people here and there, how many cars, all the kinds of data that New York City's. And then the issue is, I guess California is doing some of this according to 60 Minutes. I didn't see the show, but people called me, told me. And then the notion is, we are all social distancing over here. We're not sick. Folks over here are not. They are sick. We're not talking about arresting anybody or sending in NYPD. We're talking about figuring out how we can work together as a community to try to address why there isn't social distancing, but you don't need to waste your time over at Johnson houses because it's only Wagner houses or whatever. So that kind of discussion, is that something that you can see happening as long as it has input from the communities involved?
Absolutely. And I think that one of the things we need to consider is, I've been in a lot of conversations around the ethics of contact tracing. And so there's a lot of concern around the use of technology in this space.
Yeah.
But what I think that there's an opportunity to think about contact tracing is also an opportunity to think about tracing the needs of hard to reach communities, right? And so we've been talking about lack of access to technologies and tools. And so who might be missed? Whose voices might be absent if we solely rely on an app-based or technology-based contact tracing methodology? And so I think that there would need to be some mirroring of methods that definitely prioritize those hard to reach voices that may not have access to these technologies.
Yeah, I mean, it's all coming at one time. You have the census, which we haven't discussed, and it makes me crazy that Manhattan is behind Staten Island. I'm beside myself, but we're working on that. We want to beat Staten Island, not to mention beat the rest of the country in our percentage. But we have that issue. I don't really know even what contact tracing is, except what I read about in the papers. It's a strange bird that we've never experienced before. So what exactly is it? You did a good job describing it and indicating who should be involved to make it work. I was interested that and I hope I have this right, I think the governor's people were doing testing at Washington houses. And when they did that, they did, okay, we're testing you with the virus, but do you have anything else that we could address, right? That's what I think you're sort of saying, is that we need to look more holistically at all of us as opposed to just one portion. And Nilsa, you've certainly got a lot of experience with this. I don't know what it looks like post-COVID, but the issue is, I don't even know if there is such a thing. But do you think that there is some way in which we can approach working with people, either for contact tracing, figuring out if there are other ways that we do business, either at the community board or elsewhere? I'm sure you've been thinking about that.
Well, there has to be a way. This is not gonna disappear. This is an illness that has decimated our communities, that has awoken our communities to disparities. So there has to be ways to bring in the community to come into, for instance, you mentioned contact tracing. I think that our community would be more comfortable talking to people that they know from their communities or that have a shared common experience. This is the same issue with the census. Why is Manhattan or East Harlem answering census less than other communities? Because we have undocumented individuals who don't understand what the point of the census, and are afraid that this is another governmental plan to try to find them, arrest them, and deport them, right? So the way with what I'm saying with all that, there is a way we can try to start thinking and planning about how contact tracing will look in our community, what funding is available out there, and how we can create programs through other not-for-profits or through ourselves, having people come in, going through some kind of a process to ensure that they do training, that they understand about privacy, what the purpose of the contact tracing is, and to find out that that the contact tracing would be effective. Because, you know, you can have one person try to find out where this person was and 5 other people, but if you don't know how to talk to people and get the information in a non-threatening way so that it's usable, you're not going to succeed. So we would need a lot of components to put together, which would be training, recruitment, support from area not-for-profits and other agencies in order to build a good pilot to start somewhere identifiable, like potentially one NYCHA project.
Right. No, you must have written this or you were channeling the person who did, because what they asked is parents need to know if our kids can participate in some kind of a hackathon to help young people engage with their digital communities. Young people could create apps to help address COVID-19. That's certainly right up your alley. And it is something that I know you've been doing it. So why don't you talk about it, when you're going to do it again, if you can do it again. And then it's, you know, now I teach at Hunter once day a week. Oh my gosh. You know, these young people got kicked out of their dorms when they were needed for the healthcare workers. Then they had no place to go because their parents are not in the city. They had a grandfather who moved in, who's got the virus. Another one has a mother who's never, I mean, you're talking about teachers. This wonderful teacher, she teaches special education. She had never done the tech training of anything. So here is the student who's both working part-time, going to school. There's other children in the household, and he's teaching his mother how to do Zoom, Microsoft Team, and the list goes on. I mean, it was a story made for television and etc. So these students, what I'm trying to say is they know the issues regarding COVID-19 in too many different ways. But I'm just wondering if you're thinking about doing something that is along the lines that you've done in the past with the hackathons on this topic.
Yeah, hackathons are great ways to kind of bridge the digital divide, in the sense that it gives you an opportunity to learn and experiment. They're safe places for subject matter experts and individuals to come in and kind of like work through an idea. And so what I mentioned beforehand was Hack League, which is a program of the Department of Education CS for All program. It's an academic competition where middle school and high school students learn from their teachers, whom we've trained on how to access open data. Then they go through a process of working with subject matter experts, because you know, while you can build, this is kind of the hubris of technology, while you can pretty much build anything, the question is, are you building the right thing? And so while you may have scratching your own itch and kind of like addressing your problem, the question is it like the universal problem? Which is where you need to be talking to other people. You need to be talking to your neighbors. You need to validate your idea. You need to be talking to your friends. You need to be kind of getting out of your bubble and getting out of your comfort zone. and making sure that you're really finding all of the different facets that are around it. What are the privacy implications of the game that you're making? What is the security aspect if you have some type of dashboard for people to kind of share their information? And so we do this in a very structured way with the Department of Education in a very diverse group. The DOE focuses on making sure that we have diverse representation from all 5 boroughs. And so right now, we concluded our 5 borough hackathons. And so we were going to have the final inside of City Hall, our second final inside of City Hall on April 3rd, but that has so far been delayed. So we will reconvene our quote unquote final once we're able to all get in the same space together. In the meantime, we're pivoting to do a virtual hackathon and have an opportunity for the students to engage over a series of months, because now that we've moved into a virtual way, you have to figure out, like, things are a little bit slower. We have to align subject matter experts and right size them so that way the students can get the right perspective. So the Hack League continues. It's moving digitally. We hope that the DOE continues to get funding for the CS for All program so that way it can continue next year, and CS for All will have the 4th Hack League. That is all of our aspirations from the city budget side of things. But if you are interested in learning the exact same thing that our teachers, our Department of Education teachers have had access to, or what community board members have access to, you can go to our website, beta.nyc and /classes, and you can get access to the same teaching materials, so that way you can start to learn about New York City open data, see how the data relates to your particular problem. Sadly, COVID data is not on the open data portal. The Department of Health doesn't share the data on the open data portal. We hope that that is going to be addressed shortly. We are going to be sending an additional letter to some elected officials, encouraging them to get the data on the open data portal. In the meantime, you can get COVID data from the Department of Health's website. You will have to learn a few more tools. It isn't as easy as just getting onto the Socrata open data portal and downloading the data, but it's up there. At least portions of it are. And then you can start to look at how your community is impacted by COVID. There's a lot of other data sets that are on the open data portal. Sorry to be a little long-winded, but this is my opportunity to talk about the open data portal. So there are a lot of data sets that are on the open data portal that show you the impact of COVID, like from sanitation tonnage to 311 service requests, to you can see how this virus is impacting all of our communities on the open data portal on nyc.gov/data. You can access curriculum on the nyc.gov/data classes, which is our material. And then in the fall, we'll be looking at how we can leverage our community and our events to kind of talk about these future issues. But that's where you can see the data, and maybe you can do your own hackathon at home to learn how COVID is impacting your neighborhood.
I mean, I think people would love to do that. So it's a very helpful analysis of data, and we will work on getting it onto the portal. Clayton, I know that I'm certainly not an artist. You have a little comedy artist in your background, I noticed. But people are asking about artists because during this situation, this crisis, they are struggling. And we have been, as you know, speaking with Bosa Rivers, artists in Harlem, artists in Upper Manhattan, about their future. Their artist community, which many young people, whether they know it or not, are part of in different ways, is struggling. I mean, mostly artists rely on one kind of a box office or not. There's no third-party reimbursement for an artist. So actually, recently when we were on a call, the issue of what can we do for artists, somebody suggested even something like a gift card, so that, you know, we have gift cards for certainly for restaurants, for instance. We have to think more creatively. And I don't know if there's anything. It is very interesting to me how the artist community, without getting paid for it, that's the problem. There's no paywall here usually, has the dance and the art and the theater and many other opportunities, tours of museums and so on. And it's exciting. I mean, there's some really talented visuals going on. But I guess what I'm saying to you is, in this future, do you see if there's anything else you can think of where technology could help some of these struggling artists in the future? So it's a hard question. I don't have an answer, but I think it's something we need to think about.
Well, it is, and there's some ideas that I do have from a tech perspective that I'm getting more and more access. And of course, I serve on the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce, so I work with VOSA all the time. And one of the things that we're seeing in the tech industry is the growth of what we call XR. Because I think if there's one additional thing that can come out of the pandemic is that we have to exercise our creativity. You know, so as things look dim and all this other stuff, this is when creatives really come to light. So one way they can start to make money is to adapt some of their creativity into a, if you will, VR, XR environment where you can literally stream a movie in that environment and have people pay to be a part of that experience. So I want to encourage the creatives out there on this call and others that are driven by arts and culture is to become creative. You can have a play in a virtual world, if you will. And I'm not saying everything goes virtual, but I am saying that that's a new platform that creates another divide where if you can afford the equipment and you know about it, you can take advantage of it and make money in it. And I think there's a lot of our arts and culture folks that just simply, and by the way, the technology is not all that exciting until the arts and culture people get in it. So we techies, we love the equipment, we love writing the code, we love doing all this techie stuff that doesn't do anything. But it's not until somebody creative and goes, wow, let's do a Pokemon game. And all of a sudden, all the technology takes off. Silicon Harlem was working on AR, as you know, Gale, for many, many years. And it wasn't until Pokemon that it actually got a little shine. So the arts and culture will survive. They've got to get past this area of a sort of a ditch, but they will survive. One, if they stay up on the technology, work with the techies like myself to figure out best ways to get their art out there. The idea of theaters, playhouses, those things that are going to be reimagined as we think about what I call physical distance. I don't know why we call it social distance, but physical distance. And so we're going to have to retrofit some of those theaters to accommodate that. But at the end of the day, it comes down to creativity. Our young people need to grow up with, my first Broadway play was The Wiz, and it changed my entire life, if you will. I thought, wow, this is what I'm all about. Of course, I'm much more techie, but I love the fact that I could see a live performance. That can still happen. So I would not be discouraged. They got to get past this one. And we all, as you say every day, Gale, we all have to support the arts and culture. So whether it's giving money, whether it's giving them some encouragement, this is an era where creativity will explode.
Well, thank you, because I need to hear that, because I worry about the artists constantly. So that's very helpful. And it has been helpful to see them trying to come up with some of these ideas that you just outlined. The issue is how do you get paid for it? And that's to be decided, to be, TBA, as we say.
If you look at, Gale, if you look at gaming,
yes,
you heard about the gaming Fortnite.
Yep.
One of the top Fortnite players makes $500,000 a month. Okay. Yeah. And the reason why is because what's beautiful about Switch, the platform Switch, where we play Fortnite, you literally have an audience watching you, and they're paying. they're actually donating. They raise more money on that platform than Facebook. So you're looking at a whole new way. The arts and the folks that we know need to get a connect with me, and let's get them moving.
We will work on that for sure. Dr. Patton, the issue of mental health comes up all the time. It's, luckily, I think in our city, it hopefully become less of a stigma. Who knows? I think obviously after this pandemic, it's even worse. I don't know if there's a technology portion to it. I know that people are in their home. I know there are mental health concerns. There are DV concerns. There's telemedicine. I don't know if there's telesocial work. There should be. As others know, all I do is say social workers are needed in the schools. I've been saying that for years. That's, you get one or two and then you get a press conference. That's not what I'm talking about. But right now we're dealing with the aftermath, I assume. Yep. And so I'm just wondering, how do you look at this issue? I don't know quite how to approach it, except thank God for your profession. And I'm just wondering if there's something that you could add to all of that, because it's a huge challenge.
Yeah, so two things. Number one, I'm a social media researcher, and one of the things I learned from my social media analysis is about all the complex trauma and needs and concerns that our community has, but may not have an individual to speak to with about those challenges, but they're willing to express those things on a social media platform because it's an unadulterated space. And so we're willing to think about what social media has to offer in terms of a mental health intervention that can be useful. But at the Columbia School of Social Work, we have created COVID-19 Action. This is an action group filled with alums, faculty, and staff, and we are offering free psychoeducation training and volunteer matching opportunities. So we will have a set of psychoeducation training starting tomorrow night, where you can learn more about therapeutic interventions, train the trainer models, one about stigma, one about race and oppression in this during this time. But also we are linking our clinicians with communities and organizations that need support during this time. And so if there are community groups, individuals that are looking for support in this very urgent time, please contact us, and I can share that website with you as well.
Yeah, and I know that there is a website, the one that will be given at the end. I'm just looking for it, but I'll find it. And that one is one that Columbia University as a whole, part of their neighborhood program. And I'm sure that's one place to support, but I'm also sure that Nilsa is taking down notes, because she would be.
Yes, I am.
Yes, I know. So how could that be helpful to the community in East Harlem, Nilsa?
Well, we can always use as many sources as possible. But what's most important is that we have to be aware of the resources. If we're not aware of the resources, we can't post them on our website. We can't use word of mouth to let people know. Resources are key. Right now, it's some people say it's great that you're at home, you're social distancing, that word, as opposed to physical distancing, as Clayton has mentioned, and you should be fine. No, you've seen domestic violence go up. You've seen so many challenges happening. So how can that help East Harlem? It doesn't only have to help East Harlem. It has to help all of us, right? So all the resources that we will get here, we will pass it on to our other 11 sister brother community boards so that they can get the word out. And it continues exponentially, because every resource is only as good as the access that people use, right? So anything that we can get, as I said, I'm also the director of a multi-service center, which has 12 not-for-profits. Any resources that one person gets, another person gets, another group. So it's vitally important that any resources that anyone has that's not mentioned here, that can help just one person, that you please share it on this chat so that we can all make it available on our different platforms.
Okay. We have 320 people participating, which is a huge number. So congratulations to great panelists. And the website that will have not only bridging the digital divide, our town hall, but it's also neighbors.columbia.edu. And it'll have both this material and of course, whatever you mentioned, Dr. Patton, that you're doing at the Columbia University School of Social Work. So it's my understanding that we have to start to wrap up. It's 8 o'clock, but I want to say that each and every one of you, I hope I've answered some of the questions. I am excited about the fact that there's a lot of optimism about what we can do in terms of the, I guess, call it digital divide, even though there are so many other divides, and you can't deal with the digital divide until you've dealt with all the environmental issues that go with it. I've always said, never use technology for technology's sake. Use technology to address some of the issues that you all have listed. And it's very exciting what different people are doing. So I want to thank Dr. Desmond Patton. I want to thank Nilsa Orama. I want to thank Noel Hidalgo. I want to thank Clayton Banks. And I certainly want to thank Columbia University. And I want people to remember that we had a digital divide before the pandemic, and we certainly will have one afterwards. But I hope that we use this opportunity to address some of the underlying issues that have always been with us. It's racism, it's poverty, it's health underlying conditions, it's it's the broad lack of free Wi-Fi. If you are speaking at a high school, and I go to the high schools, and now I've learned, my first question is, who would like free Wi-Fi? And everybody's hand goes up. If you ask something more generic, you get everybody looking at you like, please, Gale Brewer, can you leave as soon as possible? But once you get a discussion going that is relevant to them, something that people need at their age, then you have a different discussion. So as you know, I'm a big fan of finding a way that civic technology in its best sense means something to those of us in communities where it's needed the most. So I thank you all for participating in our virtual town hall, Bridging the Digital Divide during COVID-19. There'll never be another time like this, I hope. And I hope we can learn from it. So thank you all very much. What an honor.
Thank you.
Thank you.